All right, thanks everyone. It's really a pleasure to talk to you about this topic, which is definitely not a one-size-fits-all um, topic at all. But I know we can often draw parallels to from talking to other institutions, looking at other institutions, comparing them to ours, and at least trying to find a way forward by doing that. And I know that that was hugely important to our process as well. So again, my name is Evan Sanders. I'm the Associate Director of Curriculum Services at Harvard Medical School, where primarily I support and my team supports the core basic and social science curriculum. And we also have a hand in, I personally have a hand in most educational technology undertakings for our program. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what my team does, we basically exist because here at Harvard Medical School, our core faculty are based at any number of affiliated teaching hospitals, but for the most part, they don't kind of sit in academic departments that are actually based here at the medical school that you might think would have administrative staff to actually help them with the logistics of their courses. So the Office of Curriculum Services, where I work, basically is the kind of logistical clearinghouse for the whole program, or at least the required courses in the program. And we handle all sorts of administrative wonders for our program, and it's a lot of fun. We've been using computer-based testing and specifically ExamSoft since the fall of 2014. So we're basically getting towards the end of our, well, it doesn't feel like the end yet, but almost heading towards the end of our second academic year using the product. And we've really had a lot of success with the platform. We started the process of moving towards computer-based testing in early 2014, and I'll be drawing from our experience with that process during this session today. And I might as well start really, as we often want to do, with the end, and really say that the main takeaway point for this session, um, as you might expect with most technology solutions, is that it's important to remember that no piece of technology will solve all your problems or achieve your goals through some type of magic or in some magical way. And I always believe that success with technology, and perhaps educational technology most of all, really comes with careful planning and a purposeful integration with your goals and operations. So, in other words, I think it's really important to be realistic at all times, help others who work with you on any side of this process to do the same, and just try to keep that sensibility about you. Um, so let's move along here. I didn't create a traditional kind of PowerPoint slideshow for this because I don't really think this process for planning to adopt computer-based testing is entirely linear. I'll go through these points, one at a time and try to keep it logical, but a lot of these steps, for lack of a better term, really occurred for us in a fairly free and overlapping and sort of concurrent way. So that's kind of why I decided to go with this fancy Prezi, or maybe not so fancy Prezi. So we'll move along here. Uh, I've narrowed it down. I've narrowed down my kind of thinking about this process to these 6 points you see in this big circle here in the middle. And I think the one component that basically is in the right order is the first one, because without identifying goals, it's pretty hard to know whether, what you're actually trying to do with exam software, and that would go for, again, any piece of educational technology. So at Harvard Medical School, we really just asked ourselves at the beginning of this process, why do we even need to do this? Um, and in a lot of respects, it was a reaction to a lot of pain points that we had been experiencing in the years, leading up to this. And I think it kind of overwhelmed us at one point, kind of in the year before, that it started to really seem more and more difficult to go about things in an old-fashioned way with respect to exams. Um, Now, although we now actually have a completely redesigned curriculum in which we're going through our very first iteration of that, that's a story for another day. At the time we started this process, we were under our previous curriculum, which consisted of many short organ system-based blocks, which occurred in the first 2 years of medical school when students take their basic science courses before they go into their hospital rotations in the third year. And these courses were usually several weeks in length, but they could range to as much as 11 weeks, which was pretty rare, and could be as short as 3 days. So as you can imagine, I mean, each of these courses had distinct faculty course directors, And the pedagogy and administration behind our assessments were really pretty diverse. And at times that could be difficult to maintain. We had multiple choice exams, which had been most recently administered via Scantron bubble sheets, quite a few essay exams, which were pencil and paper, and our stacks of 170 exams, that's our class size, were often decollated, and sometimes as many as 20 pages would be part of an exam. They'd be sent out to faculty graders, returned to us to be alphabetized. We'd manually transcribe the scores from these pieces of paper to an Excel spreadsheet, put the exams back together, and then try to find a way for students to come in and review these. And so I imagine that some of you tuning into this who are, maybe at the beginning stages of this investigative process, if you're coming from the so-called old-fashioned model, this probably sounds familiar to you, especially if you work with large classes. And for us, there usually was a lot of prayer involved in this process. Like, I hope we don't lose an entire page of the exam in the mail, or, down some sewage drain as the faculty, would be transporting these to us, walking them over from building to building, which, miraculously none of that stuff ever happened, but it could be pretty draining for us to just kind of hope for the best every time. And of course, this really delayed the assessment process for faculty and the feedback for students, which, I think that's a lose-lose. So we knew that peer schools were using computer-based testing, and around December of 2013, we started looking into moving in that direction. So I'll say we pretty much simultaneously started looking at specific products and gathering information from faculty, their interest in this to begin with, in general. And kind of back to my earlier point that a lot of these steps, especially early on, can be undertaken in a concurrent fashion, and maybe even farmed out to different people on your team, depending on how you're structured. So a lot of our initial conversations with faculty came out of things that we already knew from our experience working with them on their courses for so many years. And we knew that we knew that they wanted to reuse exams from year to year, improve them, so we could move towards as standardized of exams as possible, recognizing the imperfect world of medicine, of course. But frankly, especially with respect to the machine-scored exams, no one ever really wanted to do anything with the Scantron data. It just didn't really seem to be at our fingertips, even though, the Scantron software had reports and that sort of thing, but it just totally seemed like a splintered off process that wasn't integrated with anything else we were doing. For various reasons, including that one, faculty would often write new exams from year to year, and they would tell us that was really the hardest part of their job. They, would try to make time for doing that while they were actively teaching, and that, as you can imagine, can often be pretty close to impossible, but they would get it in under the wire. But they wanted quick and easy ways to analyze both the performance of specific questions over time and also the performance of students in a sort of snapshot fashion. How did the student do on this exam or on this question, but also longitudinally. Exam security goes without saying. Paper exams really aren't secure for a variety of reasons. Even if you don't give them back to students to keep and risk them kind of being out in the open, it still is not really secure. Someone can find an extra copy of it in the amphitheater or wherever you're administering your exam, keep it with them and pass it down to later students. And finally, one thing we heard over and over and over and over and over was from the graders is that they could really barely stand to read student handwriting anymore. And they would just ask us, isn't there a way that they could at least just type their essays for essay exams? And it just got hard to deny them, that prospect. So that was actually a pretty huge pain point, looking on the sort of pain point issues that I mentioned. So, of course, there are many, many more details about the faculty perspective, but these were the most overarching recurring points that just kind of on the ground we were dealing with on a constant basis. So moving on to the students, we here at HMS, we try to run a couple technology focus groups with the students every year, and that's kind of our way of hearing about technology that they've maybe used in other programs before they came here to the medical school, or certainly they're all connected to their friends that they knew from undergrad who are at other medical schools or just in other graduate programs, so we can hear about those things through these focus groups. And again, mostly kind of coming to a head in a year or two before we kind of started moving in this direction, we really would hear more and more that schools were using some type of computer-based testing, and maybe they had elaborate testing centers or just something that kind of made us have a new goal here. And of course, the most important piece for the students is that it gives them much more timely feedback. And with machine scored exams, we're talking about it would be immediate feedback. And sometimes even a 24-hour turnaround that we would try to get, try to achieve with Scantron just wasn't cutting it for students because they would move on to the next series of events in their course or maybe be moving on to another course entirely. So it was just operationally difficult for us to provide feedback, especially if faculty were restricting us from giving the exams back to keep, which is a pretty standard practice. So um, on top of that, we didn't actually have a secure portal for posting exam scores, which fortunately we've rectified now that we are using a much better learning management system. But it just seemed like we had a pretty gap between what we were doing and what would be inherently useful to the student experience. And maybe I should have started with that point because it all comes down to the students in the end. That's why we're here. We're here to educate. Um, but the last thing I'll mention about the student experience is that it just seemed that having a single platform for administering exams was also a really attractive option because it would kind of standardize their experience. It would just help take a stressful situation, which is an exam and many exams and that happen over a short period of time, and at least give them some sense of expectation. This is how exams work. This is the process. So that's not to be underestimated. Actually, one more thing. The students also desperately wanted to type their essays pretty much just as much as faculty wanted the students to type their essays. I think, millennial learners pretty much can't write anymore, which is maybe lamentable, but probably can't attack things like that today. Not worth fighting. Now, as a staff person leading this charge, maybe the argument, from the administrative side took precedent a little bit too often, but to be honest, that was fine by me because that directly affected my work and my team's work. But really, it just wasn't sustainable anymore to have what amounted to a couple dozen processes for faculty and students and staff with every different type of exam that we were doing. Um, and we just wanted to be more helpful to everybody and have a much more consistent process. So we weren't really going to be sad to retire our, quote unquote service of decollating and recollating exams. And we had things that we used to call recollating parties, and I'm not sure how fondly we use that term, although we tried to make those sessions as sociable as we could. But sometimes it just seemed like a piece of business that we wish we could get away from. So this really helped move us in that direction. So these are pretty high order things that we were looking at, but really I think that gave us the evidence we needed, that this was the right time, maybe if not even a little bit late, to kind of move into the 21st century. So we spent a lot of time doing our homework, as it were, and I'll be honest by admitting that we didn't actually look at any competitors. ExamSoft came to the fore early on from talking to peer schools, and we never felt like we had to move in a different direction, but that might differ from your own experience, and that would be totally fine. But this just kind of hit, the train was just running, and it seemed to be moving in a positive direction, so stuck with it. And I believe my first call to the company was in, I think, December 2013. I mean, I said we started the process in early 2014, but I called them a little bit before the holidays because we'd heard from peer schools that this was the product to check out. But keep that date in mind because I also said that we started implementing this in August 2014 or September 2014, and my first call was in December 2013. So just something to kind of keep in the back of your head, if not in the front, about timelines. I had a few product overviews on my own with one of the staff at ExamSoft and with my supervisor. She participated in these with me before talking about this too much in detail um, with the faculty, I guess. And I really wanted to be as far ahead of everyone as I could. So moving into the later phases of actually presenting the product or even just the idea of computer-based testing to faculty, I really wanted to go into that confidently so I wouldn't get too stymied by questions or just, why are we doing this or anything like that. I really wanted to have kind of come in already knowing where things were going to go. And I think that was the right move. Um, and plus, I just, that way going into the later phases where we did demos with faculty, I was able to help, push the person giving the product demo in a direction that would be more consistent with our context here and what we were doing at our organization so we don't get like mired in things that just wouldn't be relevant and could potentially, derail the whole endeavor. So here are some of the things that we did in this kind of research phase. Um, I won't read them off to you. You can check them out. Um, but I'll say we really weren't shy about asking questions and talking through really specific challenges. For instance, we don't have a testing facility here at Harvard Medical School. Um, Previously, we'd only administered exams in large amphitheaters, and we knew this wasn't going to work with computer-based testing because of the way the space was configured, the furniture, we had power issues, namely that there wasn't power at every seat in the amphitheater, and that's problematic when you're trying to use electronic devices for long periods of time. And the staff at ExamSoft were incredibly helpful in allowing us to think through these challenges and drawing parallels from other schools they work with. And I really can't underestimate how valuable it is to be working with a company that really has a lot of clients and pretty quickly they were able to draw on that. It wasn't always perfectly aligned with what we were talking about, but you could kind of assimilate a lot of that experience that you were hearing about into something that made sense for you. Um, we also talked to a couple peer schools who were already using the product. Uh, and we made sure to talk to one that was actually pretty early in the process. We talked to a school that uh, was had started working through the early phase, but hadn't actually delivered any assessments yet. So it was good. They had the process pretty fresh in their mind. So this led to a lot of lessons learned for us. Um, I think if we heard schools, people at other schools talking about problems with the software or problems with the process, we could often unpack that and figure out how to work around problems if we encountered similar things on our side or avoid them altogether. And it kind of made me remember that often with technology, people can kind of say, you know what, this doesn't work. It didn't work right. It's broken. It has a glitch. It has a bug. These are always kind of warning signs for me because a lot of times people use those terms incorrectly, and I'm not a computer programmer, but I really hesitate to use the term bug unless I really know it's a bug, and that's a specific thing, which if you don't know what it is, you can look that up, and that'll make more sense. um, but often when someone says it doesn't work, it's more complicated than that. So when we heard from other schools about areas of this that they were struggling, that really gave us a bit of a course correction to make sure that we could figure out what actually was the root cause of that issue and probably sidestep it altogether. Um, I mean, I went into this process with the assumption that this would be a really large project, a huge culture shift for everybody on all sides of it, going back to our, three categories of stakeholders. And back to my earlier point, I didn't expect this to be magical. So talking to other schools was a reminder that a project can be very effortful, even if it's going exactly as intended. And your goal is obviously to reach a huge benefit later on. So you got to keep that in your sights. Um, Once we did all this background work, it was time to talk to the faculty and other senior staff about whether we should move ahead with this product. And our approach to this phase, you'll see it really echoes earlier points that I've made. Be realistic about the work involved, keep it relevant, be specific with your questions. The last point here on the screen, um, it was really important for me. The old adage, you can bring a horse to water, but the faculty and specifically our curriculum committees, they needed to be responsible for making the decision to move ahead with computer-based testing because it was a really big decision that we're trying to roll out at an organizational level, and it needed widespread buy-in. So I did help by making things as clear as possible for them, which circumstances were fairly consistent in our exam administration across courses, so everyone could approach this with some idea that, yes, there was a lot of common ground leading us down this path, so people wouldn't feel like, well, I'm kind of cool with it, but I don't really want to weigh in personally. We tried to set that stage and make it clear what our collective background was here so people would really want to engage in the process. So we finally did decide to adopt the product, or I wouldn't be talking to you today, I guess. And the decision was made in around the late spring of 2014, and we wanted to roll it out in 2014-15 academic year, knowing that the first exam was going to take place in September, I think it was, of 2014. So that meant that the summer would really be critical to the training process. So we moved into the training phase, and I picked kind of a right-hand man, and the two of us attended 4 web-based trainings together, which was kind of the standard training protocol. And they were really, really helpful, personalized. And I just felt strongly that I shouldn't be the only person who knew all the bells and whistles, or at least the ones that we were taking on early on with the product. And realistically, it just wasn't possible to ask everyone in my office who works on exams to drop everything and train on a pretty substantial product. They were all in the loop about what we were doing and what our timelines were. But I felt that it was essential to kind of phase people in a reasonable way. And by and large, we could attack this in an intuitive approach, because as staff kind of went through their their own personal responsibilities to the curriculum, they kind of naturally got phased in. Somebody might be working on a part of the curriculum that takes early fall, someone a little bit later in the fall. So there was a natural phasing in with this system, I thought. And so opportunities would just kind of naturally arise to train them on a lot of the things that myself and my colleague had learned over the summer. So yeah, I did kind of withhold a lot of responsibility in the beginning, which made me a little nervous, and probably others a little nervous in case something happened to me, I guess. But I just thought it was the better way than overwhelming people or expecting too much of everyone without a realistic expectation that they could succeed at it. So again, back to that, I'm a broken record here, but it's back to that it's not magic idea. But by halfway through the year, I'd say our staff who interacted with the system could do about 75% of what I knew how to do, or if not more than that. So it did kind of go in a natural way. So I think the last part here now on this screen is also important, leaving little to the imagination. You really, I think, should think through your exam experiences, assuming that you can use, if you haven't used computer-based testing at all, assume that you can use knowledge of your previous exams to inform your choices. Most likely, faculty can be slow to move, so they're probably going to look in earlier times in this adoption to kind of port things over from the old way to the new way. So your previous experience is absolutely valuable, and you're probably going to want to make sure you know how to accomplish those things with the software. And sometimes that requires you to rethink how you approach something very specific. One example would be, how do I handle many multiple choice questions that share the same question stem? Knowing that now, you used to be able to just print those on one piece of paper and print the stem one time, and now these are individual items that are banked separately. Or maybe you have an essay question that has many subparts, and you're used to decollating that into, for many graders to grade. Is that still how you want to do it, or should that all kind of be part of one big essay item? But I think there's more than one way to do those kinds of detailed, to handle those kinds of detailed issues. And our sensibilities on the staff kind of converted a bit into being, wearing kind of editorial hats and we're often making these what I would call editorial decisions in these circumstances. And I think there can be many ways to approach that. But if you think things through, you're really well on your way to making those decisions well. So that's a good segue into thinking it through. Um, that's what I think is another very important step if that is not evident. And the points here really, a lot of these might be self-explanatory, and there's a lot of crossover from these into other phases that we've already gone over. Um, but a lot of times, I found myself just asking, is this sensible? Is anybody going to stumble over this if I present this question in this way, if we kind of proctor our exam in this way? Really trying to think those things through. And we knew, you know, for one huge stumbling point was that we wouldn't be able anymore to accommodate faculty who would give us exams, the afternoon before, and then we would kind of print it and have it ready to go in the morning. That happened probably more often than I care to admit. But as a result, we really had to have a whole production timeline that we weren't used to, with fairly incessant reminders and deadlines for faculty that made everyone really know that we were doing this. We have a huge cast of characters here. I mentioned that we have a lot of courses, a lot of short courses. That translates to a lot of faculty. Not all of them are on the committee, that made the decision to go with this. So it wasn't completely present to everybody that we were doing this, and certainly not at the same time. So we really just took nothing for granted. We assumed people really would know nothing, that we'd have to do a lot of hand holding. But because we identified, a sort of production timeline for that early on, it just made that flesh out a lot easier down the road. And although it probably seemed, scary to each faculty member we would phase in, it became old hat to us, and we would get to know what kinds of questions people were going to have along the way, issues people might have with templates we were trying to use, just know the various approaches people were trying to take and be able to accommodate them as readily as possible. Another example is the test runs that we did in the summer. This is something that my staff did as far before students arrived as we could. And we staged a mock exam in what we ultimately decided would be our exam areas, which were actually underutilized spaces that had been used for wet labs here. And the benefits to this space were that students would have plenty of room to spread out, and they had power at each seat because those outlets were historically there to allow people to use microscopes, which were being used less and less now that everything's gone digital. But the challenges were that there are 4 of these spaces that students were divided into, and within each of those, there were 4 separated lab bays that were separated by walls. So we had immediate proctoring challenges in that we had to proctor in 4 spaces, and within each space it was really tough to make announcements without kind of having a single focal point in each space. But we knew that these were kind of just details. We knew it wasn't going to be perfect without a testing center, and we really tried hard to imagine how things would go on the exam day. I'm happy to say this paid off, and we even described a lot of this in detail to people we were working with to get trained at ExamSoft, and again, they really helped us draw parallels from other institutions and have some way forward. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of really moving through those steps, and engaging your colleagues too to get their opinions on whether things are going to work, because in the end it's kind of a collective best guess with some of that stuff. And some things aren't going to go as planned, and that's really okay. Being flexible is a virtue here. Again, especially with technology, because things happen. And I mentioned before there can be many ways to approach a problem. So what may sometimes sort of seem like a fork in the road might just be something that's ultimately leading to a convergence of roads later on. And looking at these points, you'll notice again that I have a theme here of just being sensible, being realistic. Don't take on too much at once. Work on what you can really scale out and make consistent for your operation, and add more features as you go. I will say with ExamSoft in particular, it's a huge system. A lot of us are kind of used to working with sort of survey systems or audience response systems and things that and in a way have a similar sensibility to handling it, the technical aspect of it. Um, but I was glad that I tried to respect, kind of the enormity of an exam, of a computer-based testing platform and specifically ExamSoft, um, recognizing that it probably would do a lot of things that we weren't going to do right away. Maybe we wouldn't ever do because they're not relevant to our curriculum or our operation. So it's okay to kind of not be overwhelmed. You should not be overwhelmed because it's okay to ignore some things that don't seem really present to what you're doing. Um, so, uh, for us, I think one of our big challenges was that we had a bring your own device curriculum. So we're not administering, we're not doling out laptops that are centrally maintained. So we knew we would have students whose devices wouldn't meet system requirements. Maybe they used to, but then they did some update they weren't supposed to do, so now it doesn't anymore. And those things can happen overnight, literally between the day before an exam and the day of an exam. Things can crash. So having backup plans is hugely important. And one big backup plan for us is recognizing that we were going to have backup machines. So that was a point of collaboration with our IT department. Again, something that uh, had to happen months in advance. And it was actually a really fun collaboration because the IT team was really excited about expanding their reach into the actual kind of educational enterprise. Um, so we knew we would have to have devices on hand, and that worked out okay. And we're continuing with those plans today. Another backup plan that I'm happy to say we only had to do for the very, very first exam we administered on ExamSoft was to print hard copies for each student in case we really messed something up that we just could not have predicted. Uh, we were pretty sure that wasn't going to happen, and I'm proud to say we didn't need to have done that. But honestly, it just was a huge peace of mind for everyone. We taken that initial step, that leap, I guess it was. I'm sorry to the trees in that case, but we did recycle them. So I hope this kind of gives you a framework for really just the various thought processes I had and tried to, centralize around again, a big cast of characters. Um, I'm sure this would go differently at many different schools, but the important things are to be mindful and realistic. And this is, of course, an ongoing process for us. But we're really pleased with how it's gone so far. And we're in our second academic year, so we're starting to capitalize now on that initial load of work that occurs in the first year. Certainly, like the whole kind of setup of things doesn't happen again and again and again. It does in little ways, but at a macro level, if you do it right, it could pretty much happen once, at least for your program. So now that we're in that area where we're going to start to see like real economies of scale, that's been really pleasing, I think, for everyone. And this is probably where the faculty will start to get most thankful of all. So it's exciting for us. So yeah, I hope this kind of at a glance is helpful to you. I'll definitely take questions now about anything I talked about, or I'm also happy to talk more about what's going on in the kind of live phase because I mostly focused on the kind of adoption and implementation phase here. Um, but yeah, thank you all for being a part of this, and I'll now look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Evan. We have a few questions in, but just a reminder to everybody else, on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel, if you need to, or if you would like to type in a question, please feel free to do so. We'll start off with the first one here. Did you do a phased in implementation or a shotgun start?
It was a shotgun start. We definitely didn't have, a situation where we had, some courses that were still on paper and some, electronic. Uh, it, I think it was the right way to go though, because living in two worlds would be really hard. I mean, that said, if you're someone who works with multiple programs, um, where there's a clearer segmentation, you might be able to implement it for one program and not another.
Thank you. We have two that are kind of similar, so I'm gonna kind of combine them. How did you determine the number of backup machines to have on hand, and do you still print a few hard copies for each exam?
That's also a great question. Um, we, I guess it was pretty much a guess about the number of machines, although in our particular circumstance, the spaces, these lab spaces where we were implementing them, which have since been renovated, by the way, so they don't even exist anymore. Um, they already had computers there, and we just elected, they were desktops, so we had those configured to be backup exams because they were right there. Um, but I think again, it was sort of a guess, but we did want to overestimate, and we continue to overestimate. Now, instead of having desktops, we have laptops, and our IT department actually lent a little bit of their own, opinion on this as well when we were deciding, um, to move towards the laptops model with the backups. They asked us how many we might give out at any given time, and then kind of multiplied that by 1.5 or 2. So, but in case it's helpful, I'll say we have a class of 170. We currently have 16 backup machines. I don't think we've ever needed to use maybe more than 6 or 8 at a time, and usually it's 1 to 3. And the other question was, do we still um, print paper copies? Pretty much no. The only reason we might do that is maybe we have a new staff person who would feel safer doing that, or proctors who are kind of new and they're just a little tentative about jumping into it wholeheartedly. Sometimes if it was something really high stakes and I'm out of the office, I might recommend to my staff to print some paper copies just because I tend to still be the person who's kind of troubleshooting things, and if I'm gone, it doesn't hurt to have an additional backup plan. So, but we've not
Thank you.
needed them. I'll just say.
No, that's always good. The next question we have here is how many students on average are sitting in an exam at any given time?
At our institution, again, it's that 170 number. That's our class size, and everybody takes exams at the same time. I'm not saying that's the best way or the only way to administer exams, but that's how we've always done it here, and we're continuing to do it that way. We do have makeup exams that occur, so students who miss because they're ill or some other excused reason, um, there could be one or more students that do have to have a separate administration of the same exam on a later date. So.
Thank you. Our next question here is how far in advance do faculty submit their questions for the exams now?
Wonderful question. Probably the key, really, to your success here. Um, it's widely variable for us, again, because we have such a huge cast of characters. I think the more faculty use it, the more they'll understand why it's important to do things in advance, but also the faster they might be with using templates, or if they're reusing questions, that's just going to make for a faster process. Um, So again, kind of a broken record. Just what I said before. We went with the best guess, but we decided to have a sort of have a rollout plan of contacting faculty 2 months before an exam, even if it was like a quiz, if it was going to be their first time, with this process, and telling them, hey, this is coming up. This is a huge change for us. And a month later, we would say, we're checking in again. We actually had already set a deadline of 2 weeks before the exam. So a month after that, so this is now a month before the exam, we would check in again, say, hey, you're coming up on 2 weeks before your deadline. And then a week before that, we would remind again if they hadn't done it. And for the most part, we were able to get people to do things 2 weeks in advance. Um, Again, medicine can be imprecise. There's a lot of new medical knowledge that comes every year, especially in certain content areas, and people will tell us it's literally impossible to write an exam, or at least the entirety of an exam 2 weeks before, because we're doing things that are really up to the minute. We have a course that's based on current healthcare policy, so how could we do something 2 months in advance? And that's understandable. But by kind of prodding them a little bit, even if they would get things into us a week before, when we asked for it 2 weeks before, we could accommodate that, because that's still like a good couple business days for you to work with the questions, a good couple business days to troubleshoot, and then still another business day or two to get all the posting and delivery of that assessment underway. So maybe not ideal, but it worked out fine. Um, I certainly don't see a problem with early and often as being your mantra for reminders. And yeah, it did work for us. And now, again, we have things that kind of we've used already, so we can check. We probably don't have to check in with people 2 months in advance anymore. We're also faster with the system. We're better at it. We can probably contact them a month before and be just fine.
Thank you. Our next question here, I'm gonna I think they meant something else, but I'm gonna say it. If I say this incorrectly, please write the question back again. Do you tag the questions for exams? If so, who does the tagging? The faculty, or is there a central group to ensure consistency of categorization?
Wonderful question. I'd say that that area is something where, back to an earlier point I made, you know, not trying, not worrying about taking on too much at once. I think ideally, this could have been something where we had, a really massive collaboration with folks that are involved in, at a high level in evaluation, having them kind of determine all the learning goals and objectives that would go into our sort of category tree and really drive things that way. I don't think we have the luxury of time to do that. And so as a result, that's something that we're really phasing in iteratively and as appropriate and as that information is available. But I'll say that even as you know, a staff member with half a brain, I could probably do a lot of the handle a lot of that direction of that process with individual faculty myself. Sometimes it was obvious actually what a category might be. I'm not. That said, I'm not a physician or a scientist, so there's a lot I don't know. So in the absence of like a programmatic directive to do that, um, I really just made the executive decision to say to faculty, it's really a best practice if
I think we lost our presenter here right now. I'm gonna see if we can get him back online. If not, then we're gonna have to wrap up this webinar. But if we are not able to get the presenter back on here, I will reach out to our presenter here with the questions that we still have in the hopper here and see if he will gladly answer them.
uh,
Oh, Evan, are you back with us?
oh, sorry, did you lose me?
Sorry, we lost you there just briefly.
Oh, sorry. What was the last thing I said?
It was literally just you were just now starting to answer the or get into the question, or
Oh no. I'll remember what I said. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. So yeah, I was saying that we didn't really have the luxury of kind of having this big programmatic directive to have a category structure. I think really it just came down to time. Our main driver for implementing this system was operational. Like we wanted to just not, we wanted to get away from paper-based exams, and everything else was going to be, kind of an added benefit. So it's back to my earlier point of, you know, doing things in phases as appropriate and not necessarily having to take on all features at once. But that said, I was able to drive some type of category structure myself with the faculty, and I could at least impress upon the faculty that it's important to go at least use some broad categories with your questions. At the very least, you'll be able to a year from now look back and have a good way to navigate what's going to become a gigantic class. Another marker of performance analysis. If we're not giving exams back, but we can post a report for them through ExamSoft that says, okay, you're not going to see each individual question, but here's how you did along these categories, which ideally are learning objectives. So, long story short, it's something that we're kind of help
technical
with
difficulties there.
administrative. Yeah. Are you still losing me?
No, I think I'm the
Oh,
one that's having some technical difficulties, but
okay.
we can still go on. It's fine, but I apologize.
No worries. I
Um,
think no problem. I think I got that question all wrapped up, but if not, people can chime in.
Thank you. We'll move on here to the next one. Do you use this system for any clinical, lab, or practical exams?
At the moment, we actually don't, but we use another system for our clinical exams, what we call OSCEs, which are very familiar to health sciences schools. But we are looking into the possibility of rolling this out for those exams as well. Kind of still in investigative mode for that because we've been using another system. It didn't seem immediately uh, you know, the best way forward to use ExamSoft, but certainly we can envision a whole lot of reasons why it would be very powerful to have everything in one place. And I know a lot of schools do use ExamSoft for those purposes, and I'm sure you can be put in touch with resources that can, you know, help you with that in more detail.
Thank you. Our next question we have here is, did you have any difficulties with students understanding new processes or not following instructions?
Fortunately, we we didn't really have major problems. You know, we have a large heterogeneous class, so I again sort of expecting to be flexible, expecting that there's no magic involved. If you have 170 people, there is no way you won't have at least one person who identifies a problem. So we use the same kind of incessant reminders and planning for students as we did for faculty. Even for pre-matriculated students, we were going after them in the summer, like basically as soon as we had access to contact the admitted class, we were telling them this is now a course, a school requirement, and it was formalized into academic policy even. So that's actually an important point to make. That I made sure to interface with those powers that be to make sure that nobody could claim that there would be an issue here. We even went as far as talking to our financial aid office to see what accommodations could be made if students expressed a financial hardship. And fortunately, there are some provisions for that sort of thing through financial aid, at least here at our school. And um, what else did I want to say about that? I think we were able to deal with the outliers. Having backup machines is good, but it also I think students don't really like to use a backup machine, so if they do that for a while, it probably hits a little bit closer to home that they need to get up and running. Our main issue with the very first year, which we did not experience again in the second year, was that we had a class of rising second years, so people who had already been here for a year, who did not have a computer requirement, and although like they had minimal device requirements, there was not a specific set of requirements that would ensure they met the system requirements for ExamSoft. So um, we had to be a little bit sensitive to that. That's again why early planning was important. But some students might have come in the first year with laptops that they bought when they were a first year as an undergrad. So now we're talking about like they're getting into dinosaur mode. So we wanted to be accommodating. We had our backup plans, but even with this large heterogeneous class, we did not experience many issues.
Thank you. I have two similar questions here. Did individual instructors import their old paper exams into the system, or did they just start from scratch and import them, or just create the exams from scratch?
We had a combination of all these things. So certainly we had courses that wanted to reuse an exam in its entirety. So there was some type of import or manual entry process. Some that wanted to kind of start with that as a starting point and then edit questions. Um, so yeah, there was a huge spectrum, but I maybe this is a good time for me to mention that my department, and this I know is not done everywhere and might not work for you, but my department really holds all responsibility for what's going on administratively in ExamSoft, with the exception of grading, I guess, because faculty have to do that. But the item banking, the revisions, all that, the imports, all this stuff, my staff is doing that. again, because we're the kind of clearinghouse, the logistical clearinghouse for the program. Frankly, our faculty are a bit too spread out organizationally to expect that they could have a universal approach to that. Um, that may work fine in other programs, or I think you could envision what organizational structure is right for you. Maybe you have academic departments, and within those academic departments you have administrators, and those administrators can be kind of a team that helps keep up pretty large beasts from becoming disorganized. For us, we are that team. So faculty actually aren't interacting with the system a heck of a lot, and at our institution, I think they're pretty thankful for that. But that's not a word to the wise or anything. I think that this could be widely variable across organizations.
Thank you very much. We have another question here. How much pushback was there from faculty and how was it dealt with?
Um, the pushback probably mostly came just from anxiety or uncertainty because we, had kind of gone through this goal identification step, and we knew what faculty wanted to do. It was a little bit of PR. I mean, like sometimes perception is reality. So um, I don't want to say we didn't didn't kind of lead people down a certain path. Uh, we were open to feedback, but we made it pretty, we tried to make sure everyone knew like this is the page we were on here. People definitely wanted to do all these things. They weren't satisfied with how it was going before. So providing that context helped us just kind of approach this as a team. And I don't know, the pushback probably came with maybe more aesthetic aspects of the process. Like I don't like working with this template or that sort of thing. But we just tried to make sure that my staff could, again, by early planning, we would be able to accommodate kind of any timeline or approach.
Thank you very much. Our next question here is, do you have any tips on how to organize the filing cabinet or structure in the system? Anything you learned that really worked or didn't work?
Um, yeah, it's great. I mean, again, this can really become gigantic without like before you know it, it kind of snowballs. And I'm coming at it from a perspective where we didn't have I did not have a directive for how to keep things organized. So, uh, you know, think it through, I think, is still there. That's really important. And be reasonable. Uh, Try to be realistic. I mean, what if you don't know anything about how to categorize your questions? I bet you could figure out. This is where if this were a two-way conversation, I'd just ask a question. Well, what would you do if you didn't really know how to categorize things in a sort of um, pedagogic way? Well, you'd at least set up like an administrative category structure that helped you keep things organized based on the course titles or the time of year or something. So it would just, you wouldn't run the risk of it just having a thousand uncategorized items. Um, but also, I'll just say that you can make changes to this iteratively. So you might use a category that you think is useless, and you want to you can easily change the name of it. You can easily swap it out. You can easily just keep it there and add another one. And depending on how much you already know about ExamSoft in particular, you know, you would be happy to learn that you can have as many categories as you want per question. You can really drill down things. So it probably will work for you even if you're only using it in a very kind of high level way. I don't know if that really answers your question because it's hard without getting specific, but
Thank you very much. We have another question here. If you could go back to December 2013 and give yourself advice, knowing what you know now, what would that advice be?
ooh, I wanna give some thought to this. Um, a lot of it would probably end up being fairly technical, just like how to how to learn how to do things more quickly, or nothing I think we had any major missteps on, but there's trial and error involved with any technical process. Uh, this is a really good approach to preparing a document for an import or something like that. So for me, I'm always looking for those technical enhancements to just making work faster. Um, at the risk of sounding like just really full of myself, I'll just say that I would probably reassure myself that I was doing things on the right timeline. Um, I think I got lucky. I didn't know if this was going to work out. We just tried to do things in a way that didn't feel too pressured, that really felt like we were engaging the right people. So looking back on it, knowing that it was by and large a success, um, I would probably tell myself, stay on track. So.
Thank you very much. We have two more questions left here. First one, how did you and the faculty decide on the categories for tagging questions?
So yeah, I mean, again, I think a lot of this happened in the beginning with just me kind of making editorial or executive decisions. At the very least, I said like everything should be tagged with the name of the course or the primary subject matter of the course. And then, as part of our reminder process, I said we reached out 2 months before, 1 month before, 2 weeks before, 1 week before. As part of that language, we told them you can categorize your questions. You don't have to, in this really big ramp up here, but here's the work that you'll save in the future, or here are the goals you can meet in the future by doing this now. So we had a spectrum of adherence to that. We still do, frankly. But I also think that when we do take a more committed approach to kind of integrating our category structure online with what is actually like our system of learning objectives here for our program, it'll be a lot easier because we'll just kind of know how things work and we'll probably be able to delve into it.
Thank you. And then our last question we have here is the grading and data analysis, is it completed within the software or do you extract it and complete it separately? And then do you also cover the results of the release as well?
Um, do we cover the results of the release? What does that mean exactly? Maybe I can get some clarity on that. But back to the first question um, about data and analysis, it's all really done in the system. At least the the analysis that you would think uh, will be should be most readily available to faculty and students. Um, most you're gonna attack a lot just by students knowing their score and basic statistics of the class. It could do a whole lot more than that. You have customized reports. You have a lot of statistics about item performance. So if you work with any statisticians or you are a statistician, it gives you some basic statistics, but then of course you have raw data. You can have data about how much time people are spending on questions, all that stuff. So it really depends how deep you want to go. We're not kind of in that deep dive right now, but the fact that especially with a machine scored exam, within a couple minutes of finishing, of the whole class finishing, literally within a couple minutes, we can generate that report. We can send a PDF report to anyone who's not, uh, involved with the system itself. And posting reports for students is really great as well. So.
Okay, so the second, I got more clarification on that second part. It was pretty much how do you handle the exam reviews with the students? Do you release the results to the students?
Yeah, great question. This is actually something we still have a spectrum of experience, and we're still struggling with a little bit the absence probably of the testing facility. Some faculty still do give exams back, and they just plan to write a new exam year after year because they know once the exam's out there, that's it. And that's just their choice that's how they want to use the exam as an educational tool. And that's by and large the easiest thing to do because with a couple clicks, that report can be available for students, which would include the entire exam itself. For exams that we don't give back, well, the first way to go about this is to use the secure review feature in ExamSoft or the application that students use called SoftTest. Um, Works again particularly well for machine scored exams, for multiple choice exams, because while they're still at the exam itself, they can review the questions and see the correct answers, but they're still in that lockdown secure environment, so they can't take screenshots, they can't save anything, um, and they get immediate feedback. Not, they don't just see the correct answers, but they see how they answered, and they can compare. So we've adopted into our exam administration process that there needs to be time for that, and nobody really fights back on that. Sometimes we have to kind of make, tweak a little bit, like how long an exam is, to make sure there's time to do that. It's still challenging for essay exams that are graded after the fact, and we want students to be able to read the essay grade or comments. And right now we can have students come into the office, and the sort of foolproof way is we can print out a report for students to review. As you can imagine, there's just a lot of operational challenges with this, but it's what we're doing so far. We did it before, before we had computer-based testing, so it wasn't like a huge stretch, but we would like to try to find like a scalable, just operational process for our office where we could capitalize on the digital nature of things but not lose the security. And I know there are ways to do it. It's just it can be hard sometimes based on your own set of realities. So I welcome feedback from anyone else who's already done this to know what they're doing in these circumstances.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Evan, for that wonderful presentation. I just have a quick reminder for everyone. As soon as you close out of the GoToWebinar control panel, you will have a quick survey pop up. It's only 5 questions long. We would appreciate your feedback. Thank you all, and the recording for this presentation will be available within the next few days and will be emailed to you all directly. Thank you very much for everybody's time, and have a wonderful day. Wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.